They called them bandits, laughed at their worn boots and outdated rifles. That was February 1955. By summer, French officers were whispering a different word: ghosts. Something was happening in those mountains, something that turned the rules of warfare inside out. Elite colonial troops were vanishing, outposts were burning, and no one could explain how fighters with almost nothing were outmaneuvering one of the most powerful armies on earth. What changed in those 5 months, and why couldn't France see it coming? November 1st, 1954, 4:47 a.m. Ores Mountains, Algeria. The wind cuts through the limestone peaks like a blade. French Lieutenant Pierre Dupont stands outside his outpost, cigarette burning between his fingers, watching the darkness dissolve into dawn. Behind him, 23 soldiers sleep in wooden barracks that smell of coffee and diesel fuel. The tricolor flag snaps in the wind above them. Dupont laughs when his corporal mentions the rumors. Berber shepherds talking about men with rifles gathering in the caves, local teachers vanishing into the mountains, whispers of revolution. These people, Dupont says, flicking ash into the wind. They have hunting rifles and farming tools. We have the French army. He doesn't know that in 7 hours, his outpost will be burning. He doesn't know that the men he's laughing about are already watching him through binoculars from a range 3 kilometers away. He doesn't know that France, one of the world's most powerful military forces, is about to be humiliated by fighters who know these mountains like their own heartbeat. The Ores Mountains rise like jagged teeth across northeastern Algeria. Peaks reaching over 2,300 meters. Valleys so deep they swallow sunlight. Caves that tunnel for miles beneath the earth. For centuries, these mountains have been a fortress. The Romans couldn't fully conquer them. The Ottomans learned to leave them alone. Now, France, drunk on a century of colonial control, believes it can succeed where empires failed. They are wrong. At this moment, scattered across these peaks, 3,000 men are preparing to strike. They call themselves the FLN, the National Liberation Front. Most are farmers, teachers, and laborers. They have 400 rifles between them. No artillery, no air support, no tanks. What they have is something more dangerous. They know every cave, every trail, every hidden water source in these mountains, and they are done being ruled by people who don't. Dupont takes a final drag of his cigarette. The sun breaks over the eastern ridge, painting the rocks gold and crimson. Beautiful, he thinks. Peaceful. He has no idea what's coming. Because at this exact moment, in a cave 15 kilometers south, a man named Mostefa Ben Boulaid is checking his watch, a former French army sergeant who fought in Italy during World War II, a man who learned European military tactics, then came home to find his people treated as subjects in their own land. He's been planning this day for months, coordinating attacks across the entire country. 70 targets, all hitting simultaneously. The message will be impossible to ignore. Algeria is no longer yours to take. Ben Boulaid gives the signal. His fighters move down the mountain like water finding cracks in stone. Silent, invisible, deadly. The war for Algeria's independence has begun, and France is about to learn a brutal lesson that will echo through history. You cannot defeat people fighting for their homeland on ground they've known since birth. By noon, the French military command in Algiers receives the reports. 30 attacks, police stations burning, French officials ambushed, telegraph lines cut. The Governor-General, Roger Leonard, reads the intelligence briefs with a furrowed brow, but his chief military advisor, General Paul Cherrier, waves it off. Bandits, he says, desperate men making noise. France has controlled Algeria for 124 years, not as a colony, but as an integral part of France itself. 3 departments, Algiers, Oran, Constantine, officially French territory. 1 million European settlers, the Pied Noirs, owned the fertile coastal lands. 9 million Algerians, the indigenous population, are French subjects without full citizenship. They can be conscripted to die for France, but they cannot vote in French elections. They work French-owned farms, mines, and factories for wages that keep them in perpetual poverty. This system has worked for France for a century. Why would it fail now? General Cherrier has 50,000 troops stationed across Algeria. Modern rifles, artillery, armor, air support. The French military just helped defeat Nazi Germany 9 years ago. These are battle-hardened soldiers with superior training and unlimited supplies. The men in the mountains have hunting rifles and homemade explosives. It should be no contest. But Cherrier doesn't understand what he's facing. This isn't just an armed rebellion. This is the ignition of something that's been building for decades. Every massacre France committed, every land theft, every Algerian veteran who returned for fighting for France in World War II and came home to find himself still treated as inferior in his own country, every child who watched French soldiers beat their father, every woman who worked French vineyards for pennies while the owners grew rich on wine sold in Paris. All of it, every humiliation, every injustice, every broken promise is fuel, and the Ores Mountains are where the match has been lit. Lieutenant Dupont's outpost is one of the first to burn. The attack comes fast. FLN fighters emerge from 3 directions simultaneously. They hit the ammunition depot first, turning the French soldiers' own explosives against them. Dupont runs from the barracks in his undershirt, rifle in hand, shouting orders that no one can hear over the gunfire. By the time reinforcements arrive 2 hours later, 3 French soldiers are dead. The outpost is rubble. The attackers have vanished into the mountains like smoke. French newspapers in Paris report it as a minor incident. Disturbance in Algeria, they call it. The French public barely notices. Algeria is supposed to be France. Nothing serious could possibly go wrong there. But in the Ores Mountains, Mostafa Ben Boulaid is already planning the next phase. He knows the French will respond with overwhelming force. He's counting on it. Because the mountains are not just terrain, they're a weapon. And he's about to show France exactly how deadly geography can be when wielded by people who refuse to surrender. The French military command sends 2,000 additional troops into the Ores region. They establish fortified positions in the valleys. They patrol the roads. They search villagers for information about the rebels. They find nothing. Because the FLN fighters aren't hiding in villages. They're in the mountains, in caves the French don't know exist, on trails the French maps don't show. And every time the French venture too deep into the peaks, the mountains swallow them whole. December 1954. The Ores Mountains, near Arras. Captain Jean-Marc Rousseau leads a column of 60 French soldiers up a narrow valley. The December cold bites through their uniforms. Their boots crunch on frost-covered stones. The valley walls rise on both sides, sheer limestone cliffs that block out the afternoon sun. Rousseau doesn't like it. Too narrow, too exposed, but his orders are clear. find the rebels, engage them, destroy them. Intelligence reports say a group of fighters is camped somewhere in these mountains. Maybe 50 men, maybe fewer. Rousseau's force has superior numbers, superior weapons, superior training. This should be simple. They walk for 3 hours. Nothing. Just wind and rock and the occasional goat track. Some of the younger soldiers start to relax. Maybe the intelligence was wrong. Maybe the rebels already fled. Then the mountains erupt. Gunfire comes from above, from the cliffs. Bullets ricochet off stone, whining through the air like angry hornets. Rousseau's men dive for cover, but there is no cover. The valley floor is exposed. Men scream. Blood spreads across the frost. Rousseau shouts orders, trying to organize a counterattack, but his soldiers can't see the enemy. Just muzzle flashes from the cliff faces, shadows moving between the rocks. They fire back, shooting at ghosts. The ambush lasts 11 minutes. When the shooting stops, 7 French soldiers are dead. 14 are wounded. The FLN fighters melt back into the mountain. By the time French reinforcements arrive with helicopters and artillery support, there's nothing to target, just empty cliffs and blood-soaked ground. Rousseau stands in the valley, hands shaking, staring up at the rocks. He realizes something that terrifies him. The enemy knows exactly where they are at all times. The French are blind, stumbling through terrain they don't understand, while the FLN watches from positions they've probably used for centuries. This isn't war as Rousseau was trained to fight it. There are no front lines, no clear objectives, no pitched battles where superior firepower decides the outcome. This is something else, something the French military has no doctrine for. The villages in the foothills become eyes and ears for the fighters. French patrols roll through, demanding information, threatening punishment, but the villagers say nothing. Some because they support the FLN, some because they're terrified of what the fighters will do if they collaborate, some because they've simply had enough of French rule and choose silence as their weapon. A young FLN commander named Ali Kafi understands this perfectly. Before the war, he was a school teacher in Aris. He taught French grammar to Algerian children. He watched those children go home to houses with dirt floors while French settlers' children lived in villas with running water and electricity. He watched the French military conscript his former students to fight in Indochina, then return them in coffins draped with a flag that never treated them as equals. Now, Kafi moves through the mountains with 23 fighters. They strike at dawn, hit a French convoy, kill 2 soldiers, seize their weapons and disappear before backup arrives. 3 days later, they're 40 kilometers away, hitting another target. The French can never predict where they'll appear next because there is no pattern, no schedule, no headquarters to bomb. The FLN is everywhere and nowhere. By January 1955, 3 months into the rebellion, French casualties in the Ores region reached 94 dead. The number shocks military command. This was supposed to be over in weeks. Instead, it's escalating. General Sharia requests 20,000 more troops. Paris approves. They send Foreign Legion units, paratroopers, elite colonial infantry. They're still thinking this is a problem that can be solved with more soldiers. They're still thinking like an army fighting another army. They don't understand yet that they're fighting the mountains themselves, and the mountains cannot be defeated. February 1955. French Forward Operating Base, Taku. Colonel Henry Ducasse spreads a map across the table in his command tent. Red circles mark known FLN positions, except they are not really known. They are guessed. Yesterday's intelligence is worthless today because the fighters never stay in one place. Ducasse has 3,000 men under his command, modern equipment, radio communication, air support on call, and yet he feels like he's fighting shadows. His scouts report movement near a village called Mchunesh, maybe 30 fighters. Dukas orders a sweep operation, 200 soldiers, supported by armored vehicles and spotter planes. They surround the area at dawn. They search every house, every shed, every animal pen. They find 6 old hunting rifles and a sack of ammunition that looks like it's from World War I. The fighters are already gone, 30 kilometers east, hitting a different target. This is the pattern. The FLN doesn't defend territory, they use it. They don't hold positions, they flow through them. The Ores Mountains become their infrastructure. Caves serve as hospitals, weapons depots, meeting halls, and sleeping quarters. Springs provide water. The Berber population, native to these mountains for millennia, shares knowledge of every hidden path. Where French maps show empty space, the FLM sees highways. Mostafa Ben Boulaid refines the strategy with brutal efficiency. Hit hard, hit fast, disappear. Never give the French a target worth their firepower. A fighter named Ajul Ajul, a former shepherd who knows these mountains like most people know their own homes, leads raids that seem impossible. His unit attacks a French garrison, kills 5 soldiers, captures their weapons, and vanishes before the French can even radio for help. 3 days later, those same weapons are used in an ambush 70 kilometers away. The French try everything. They send patrols deeper into the mountains. The patrols get ambushed. They establish observation posts on high ground. The FLN attacks them at night when darkness gives the advantage back to the people who live here. They bring in tracker dogs. The dogs lose the scent on the rocky terrain where water and wind erase every trace. Lieutenant Dupont, the same officer who laughed at the rumors back in November, now commands a garrison near Batna. He doesn't laugh anymore. He's lost 16 men in 4 months, not in battles, in ambushes, booby traps, and raids where the enemy appears out of nowhere and disappears just as fast. His soldiers are terrified. They walk the mountain trails knowing that every boulder could hide a gunman, every quiet valley could be a kill zone. Dupont writes letters to his wife in Lyon. He doesn't tell her about the fear. He doesn't tell her that his hands shake when he holds his coffee cup. He tells her the weather is nice, that he's looking forward to coming home, that everything is under control. Everything is not under control. The French military tries to cut off the FLN's support. They implement collective punishment. If a village is suspected of helping the fighters, the French burn crops, confiscate livestock, arrest every military-aged male. It's meant to terrorize the population into compliance. It has the opposite effect. For every village brutalized, 10 more families send their sons to join the FLN. For every arbitrary arrest, 20 more people decide that French rule must end at any cost. The cruelty doesn't break the rebellion, it feeds it. A young fighter named Larbi Ben Mihidi watches this from a mountain camp. Before the war, he was a political organizer trying to win rights through negotiation. The French ignored him. Now he's a guerrilla commander and the French can't ignore him anymore. He coordinates supply lines, organizes training camps, and plans operations that stretch French forces to their breaking point. By spring 1955, the Ores Mountains have become ungovernable. French forces control the roads during daylight. At night, those same roads belong to the FLN. Convoys move only with heavy escort. Soldiers refuse to patrol certain areas because too many men have died there. The mountains that France thought it controlled are now enemy territory, and the enemy is everywhere. In Paris, the government tells the public that order is being restored, that the situation is stabilizing, that victory is close. In the Ores Mountains, French officers know the truth. They are losing. May 1955, somewhere in the Ores Mountains. Private Francois Moret is 19 years old. He arrived in Algeria 3 weeks ago, fresh from basic training in Marseille. His sergeant told him this would be police work, quiet patrols, checkpoint duty, maybe some boredom. Now, Moret crouches behind a rock, his rifle clutched so tight his knuckles have gone white. The convoy he was traveling with, 6 trucks carrying supplies to an outpost near Kenchela, hit a roadside bomb 20 minutes ago. The lead truck is burning. 4 soldiers are dead. The others are pinned down, taking fire from positions they can't see. Moray's sergeant is screaming orders, but the words don't make sense anymore. Everything is noise and smoke and the sharp crack of bullets hitting stone. A soldier next to Moray, a corporal from Toulouse, whose name he never learned, takes a round in the chest. The man's eyes go wide with surprise, then empty. He falls forward, and Moray realizes he's never seen anyone die before. He's seeing it now. The attack lasts 40 minutes. When it finally stops, the silence is worse than the gunfire. 9 French soldiers dead, 13 wounded. The FLN fighters took the weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies from the convoy and then disappeared into the mountains. By the time reinforcements arrive, there's nothing to chase, just bodies and burning vehicles and young men like Moray who will never sleep well again. This is happening all over the Ores Mountains now. Not occasionally, daily. The French military is hemorrhaging men and equipment to an enemy they cannot pin down, cannot predict, cannot defeat. General Cherrier is replaced. The new commander, General Andrezella, arrives with promises of a new strategy. More aggressive patrols, better intelligence gathering, heavier retaliation against suspected rebel villages. He brings 15,000 additional troops. He brings helicopters. He brings napalm. None of it works. Because the fundamental problem hasn't changed. The French are fighting on ground they don't understand, against people who know every centimeter of it. The FLN fighters can survive on wild herbs and spring water for weeks. They can navigate by starlight through terrain that looks identical to French eyes. They can hear a convoy coming from kilometers away because they know how sound echoes in these valleys. The French have technology. The FLN has knowledge. And in the Ores Mountains, knowledge is more valuable than any weapon. Mustafa Ben Boulaid expands operations. He establishes a network of camps deep in the most inaccessible areas. Some are simple, just caves with supplies hidden in rock crevices. Others are sophisticated, complete with training areas, medical facilities, and weapons workshops where fighters repair captured French rifles and manufacture ammunition from scavenged materials. French intelligence knows these camps exist. They just can't find them. When they do locate one and send troops to destroy it, they walk into ambushes. The camps are always positioned where the approach routes can be watched, where escape routes lead deeper into the mountains, where the terrain favors defenders who can shoot downhill at soldiers struggling upward through narrow passes. Lieutenant Colonel Marcel Bijard leads a paratrooper unit into the mountains in July. Bijard is a legend, a World War II resistance fighter, a veteran of Indochina. He's fought in jungles, deserts, and cities. He thinks he understands guerrilla warfare. The Ores Mountains teach him otherwise. His unit spends 3 weeks hunting a group of fighters reported to be operating near Aris. They find nothing, no contacts, no camps, no traces. His men are exhausted from climbing steep trails in summer heat, carrying heavy packs, sleeping on rocks. They are drinking more water than they brought, getting it from streams that might be contaminated. Several come down with dysentery. On the way back to base, they are ambushed. FLN fighters hit them from elevated positions, kill 4 French paratroopers, wound 7 more, and escape before Bijard can organize a counterattack. His men are supposed to be elite, the best France has, and they just got beaten by farmers with rifles. That night, Bijard sits in his tent and writes a report that his superiors don't want to read. The essence: we cannot win a conventional military victory here. The terrain favors the enemy too much. Every advantage we have, vehicles, artillery, air support, is negated by mountains where those things can't operate effectively. We're not fighting an army. We're fighting a population that learned to weaponize their own geography. The report is filed away. Paris isn't ready to hear it. But the soldiers in the Ores Mountains know it's true. The fear is no longer hidden. You can see it in the way they move, quick, nervous, always watching the high ground. You can hear it in the way they talk. Quieter now, less joking, more resignation. You can feel it in the camps at night. Young men who came here thinking they'd restore order, now just praying they survive long enough to go home. The mockery is gone. In its place, respect, terror, and the slow realization that France has walked into something it cannot win. August 1955. The Aures Mountains have become France's nightmare. French military casualties in the region now exceed 800 dead, thousands more wounded. Equipment losses are staggering. Trucks, weapons, ammunition, radio equipment. The FLN is better armed now than when the war started, using captured French rifles, machine guns, and explosives. Every failed French operation becomes a resupply mission for the rebels. But the real defeat isn't measured in body counts. It's measured in control. France no longer controls the Aures Mountains. They never really did. They just didn't know it until the FLN showed them. Paris sends more troops. By autumn 1955, there are 100,000 French soldiers in Algeria, a massive military presence. And yet, in the mountains, the FLN operates freely. They've established a parallel administration, collecting taxes, settling disputes, recruiting fighters, training new units. The French might hold the garrison towns during the day, but the mountains belong to Algeria. The political consequences ripple outward. The FLN's success in the Aures inspires uprisings in other regions, Kabylia, the Atlas Mountains. Across northern Algeria, guerrilla groups form using the Aures model. Know your terrain, hit fast, disappear, never give the enemy a target worth their firepower. What started as a mountain rebellion is becoming a nationwide war. French politicians panic. This was supposed to be a minor disturbance. Instead, it's becoming an existential crisis. Algeria isn't just a colony, it's legally part of France. Losing it would be like losing Normandy or Provence. Unthinkable. So, they escalate. The French military adopts brutal tactics. They create forbidden zones in the mountains, areas where anyone found is assumed to be a rebel and can be shot on sight. They forcibly relocate entire villages, moving populations away from areas where the FLN operates. They use torture to extract intelligence from suspected rebels. They execute prisoners without trial. None of it breaks the resistance. Mostafa Ben Boulaid is killed in March 1956, not by French forces, but by a booby-trapped radio they managed to plant. His death is a blow, but the movement he helped build doesn't collapse. It grows because the FLN was never about one man, it was about an idea that had been suppressed for 124 years. Algeria belongs to Algerians. New commanders rise. Men like Hossein Ait Ahmed and Krim Belkacem continue the strategy that Ben Boulaid perfected. The mountains remain unconquerable. French soldiers still die in ambushes. Convoys still burn on mountain roads. The fear still spread through every French unit stationed in the Aures. By 1956, the French have 400,000 troops in Algeria, the largest military deployment since World War II. They build fortified lines. They use helicopters to leapfrog over difficult terrain. They bring in psychological warfare units to win hearts and minds. They pour billions of francs into a machine war designed to crush the rebellion. And still, they cannot control the mountains. Lieutenant Dupont, now a captain after 2 years of survival, walks through a destroyed village near Batna. The houses are burned, the fields are salted. The population has been relocated to a camp surrounded by barbed wire. This is what victory looks like now. Scorched earth and empty villages, and people imprisoned in their own country. Dupont doesn't feel victorious. He feels sick. He remembers November 1954, standing outside his outpost, smoking a cigarette, laughing at the rumors of rebellion. That man seems like someone else now, someone naive, someone who didn't understand what happens when you push people too far for too long. The French military will stay in Algeria until 1962. They'll deploy over 500,000 troops. They'll kill hundreds of thousands of Algerians. They'll commit atrocities that will haunt France for generations. But they will never reclaim the Ores Mountains. They will never defeat the fighters who turned peaks and valleys into weapons. They will never break the spirit that was forged in those caves and passes and rocky heights. In the end, France will negotiate. They'll sign agreements recognizing Algerian independence. They'll withdraw their troops and their settlers and their flags. They'll call it a political solution, but everyone will know the truth. France lost. Not because they lacked soldiers or weapons or resources. They lost because they underestimated people fighting for their freedom on ground they'd known since birth. The Ores Mountains taught France a lesson that echoes through every colonial war that followed. You cannot defeat a population that refuses to surrender. You cannot conquer land where the people are the terrain. You cannot win a war when geography itself is your enemy. The FLN understood this from the first shot fired in November 1954. July 5th, 1962, Algiers. The tricolor comes down. The green, white and red flag of independent Algeria rises in its place. In the streets, millions of people celebrate. They dance, they cry, they fire guns into the air in jubilation. After 132 years of French rule and 8 years of brutal war, Algeria is free. But the real victory didn't happen here in the capital. It happened in the mountains, in the Ores peaks where it all began, in the caves where fighters slept on stone and ate whatever they could forage, in the valleys where ambushes turned French confidence into fear, in the passes where the geography of Africa defeated the military might of Europe. The final casualty figures tell a story of unimaginable sacrifice. Over 300,000 Algerians died in the war for independence. Some estimates put it much higher, perhaps 500,000 or more. Entire villages were destroyed, families were torn apart, children grew up knowing only war. The French lost approximately 25,000 soldiers, but they lost something more valuable: the myth of invincibility, the illusion that superior technology and military training could overcome people fighting for their homeland, the belief that colonialism could last forever if you just applied enough force. The Ores Mountains shattered that illusion. Those early fighters, men like Mostafa Ben Bolayad, Ajul, Ali Kafi, became legends. Not because they had better weapons or more soldiers, but because they understood something fundamental. In a war for survival, the people who know the land will always have the advantage. They turned the mountains into an ally. They made the terrain itself fight for Algeria's freedom. Their strategy became a blueprint. Vietnam studied it. Cuba studied it. Liberation movements across Africa and Asia studied it. The lesson was clear. Guerrilla warfare waged on home ground by people with nothing to lose can defeat even the most powerful armies. But this wasn't just a military victory. It was a psychological one. For 124 years, France told Algerians they were inferior, that they needed French civilization, that they couldn't govern themselves, that their culture, language, and identity were less valuable than French ways. The war, and especially those early victories in the Ores Mountains, proved all of it false. Algerians didn't need France. France needed Algeria, its resources, its land, its labor. And when Algerians decided they were done providing those things, France couldn't stop them. No amount of soldiers or bombs or torture could reverse that decision once it was made. Today, the Ores Mountains still stand, the peaks that witnessed the birth of Algeria's revolution, the valleys where French convoys burned, the caves where fighters planned operations that would change history. Tourists visit now, hikers climb the trails. The land that was once a battlefield is healing, but the memory remains. In Algeria, children learn about November 1st, 1954. They learn about the fighters who refused to accept colonial rule. They learn that their grandparents and great-grandparents didn't wait for freedom to be granted. They took it at an enormous cost because it was their right. The story of the Ores Mountains is more than just military history. It's a story about what happens when people decide they'd rather die free than live as subjects. It's about the power of knowledge, knowing your land, your culture, your worth in the face of overwhelming force. It's about the resilience of the human spirit when everything else has been taken away. France went into those mountains in 1954 thinking they were fighting bandits, criminals, troublemakers who could be crushed with a show of force. They were actually fighting the future. They were fighting a generation that had seen enough, that had fought in France's wars, returned home to oppression, and decided enough was enough, that turned rocks and caves and mountain passes into weapons, that taught the world you don't need the biggest army to win, you need the strongest will. Algeria's independence wasn't won in a single battle. It was won in 1,000 small victories across 8 years of war. But it started in the Ores Mountains, with fighters who had more courage than ammunition, with leaders who turned France's advantages into liabilities, with a population that chose resistance over submission. The Ores Mountains didn't just witness Algeria's liberation, they made it possible. And that's a lesson that echoes far beyond 1962, far beyond Algeria. It's a lesson for every colonized people, every oppressed nation, every population told they are not good enough to rule themselves. Geography can be destiny if you know how to use it. Will can overcome weapons if you refuse to break. Freedom can be won if you're willing to pay the price. The Ores Mountains proved all of this, and in doing so, they helped free a nation. If you found this story powerful, leave a comment below. What other untold African stories should we cover next? Hit that like button and make sure you subscribe. This is just one chapter in Africa's incredible history of resistance, brilliance, and triumph. Read the full detailed blog post in the description below. And please subscribe and show your support. Every subscription helps us continue making content like this. Content that reclaims African narratives, honors African heroes, and inspires the next generation. We can't do this without you. This is the rise of African nations, and we are just getting started.